right, hello everybody, and welcome to the National Fragile X Foundation's Let's Talk webinar. I'm your host, David Solomon, the NFXF Communications Coordinator, and today's subject is back to school. So we're joined today by two very special guests. There's Holly Usrey-Roos, who is the Links Program Coordinator for the National Fragile X Foundation. She has two children, a son, Parker, and a daughter, Allison, with Fragile X syndrome. She founded Central Illinois Fragile X and is currently the co-leader. Holly has been a speaker at several conferences, including the NFXF international conferences, on topics such as working with your school, media relations, and fundraising. Our second guest today is Jayne Dixon-Weber, who is the Support Services Coordinator for the National Fragile X Foundation. She has two children, one an adult son, Ian, who has Fragile X syndrome, and the other a typical daughter, Cassie. Jayne has assisted with NFXF's Adolescent and Adult Project and authored and edited books on children with special needs and Fragile X syndrome. She has presented at many conferences and is also the co-leader for the Links group in Colorado. Hi, Holly and Jayne.
Hi.
Hi.
So first we're going to begin with a presentation from Holly and Jayne, followed by a Q&A session, so please hold your questions until then. They're going to be referring to their back-to-school online toolkit often. So in the bottom left corner you see a chat box, and I'm going to put the link in there so you can copy and paste that into your browser if you'd like to follow along. So Jayne, Holly, you guys can take it away.
Great.
David.
I'm just waiting for the first slide.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so Jayne and I are going to talk about preparing you guys for back to school, or helping you prepare your children to go back to school. Back to school can be a time of high anxiety, not only for the children, but for us parents as well, and also for the staff. The goal tonight is to help families prepare for this often hectic time in this interactive webinar. The topics will include how to make a back-to-school toolkit, along with discussion on preparing teachers and students for a new school year, transitions, schedules, talking to students and faculty about Fragile X syndrome, and planning for emergencies.
So here's a list of the actual topics that we'll discuss tonight. So we'll start with a positive student profile, and then you can read through the list. You know, we're going to talk about the things that teachers should know and do a review of the lesson planning guide, different transition ideas. We'll talk about school schedules, sensory diet activities, and so we're going to cover each one of these topics in detail now.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is the positive student profile. And when you go to your toolkit, this is actually going to link you to something that Melissa Wellen put together. Melissa wrote an article for the National Fragile X Foundation a while back talking about the importance of positive student profiles. This is something I've used for my children ever since they started preschool, and so we've been doing it for quite a few years. It's basically a form that you fill out, and you're kind of trying to give a snapshot of your child. You want to be sure that you're trying to be helpful and help, especially for our children who are nonverbal. For those who know and have followed Parker, my son, for a while, Parker was basically nonverbal, with very minimally verbal until he was 10. So this was really important for me because Parker couldn't go into school and say, my favorite color is red, or I like Spider-Man, or something like that. So I really needed to help bridge that gap there and provide as much information to the teachers as I could. And along with his likes and dislikes, I wanted to be sure to include what challenges they may come up with. These are also great during the IEP process. You can update them every year. You can include your teachers and your therapists and add more information on or revise it each year. Pretty easy. Once you get that first one under your belt, they tend to go much easier after that. The most important thing with the positive student profile is that you want to focus on what your child can do, because it is positive. We want it to be a positive profile. So the basic questions that are asked, who the child is, what are their strengths, what are their successes, what are their greatest challenges, what supports do they need, what are your dreams for them, and that's one that's a good one to think about, and some other helpful information. So when you go to this link, you'll actually see a few different examples. One of them will be Allison's. This was hers from when she started Little Learners, which was our preschool program. So this is how it looks if it's just written out. I wanted to be sure that I talked about all the great things about Allison, you know, that she loves riding horses and riding her bike, and she really enjoyed fishing at that time in life. You know, her favorite color is pink, and although Allison is very verbal, her anxiety really gets the best of her, and this was very helpful because for those times when she couldn't relay that information, they had it there for her. So we talked about her, it talks about her strengths, her most recent successes, and what supports are needed and what our dreams were for her. So this is a basic way to do it if you just want to write it out. Now, Ashley Newsey from Phoenix actually created one that's more visual for her son this year. And so if we could take a look at that one, this is Ezra's positive student profile, which is just beautiful. We were all blown away with Ashley's creativity. And this is basically doing the same thing. What he likes, how he learns best, what his dislikes are. And again, it's just a snapshot into Ezra to help transition his teachers to get to know him a little bit better as the school year starts. So this is another great example of how it can be done just a little bit differently. And what I love about this one is it puts a face with it, and I'm really big on putting a face with the child. So this is another great example and a great way to do a positive student profile as well. The next thing we're going to talk about is the top 10 things a teacher should know about Fragile X syndrome. Laura Yankowitz put these together, so you'll see her link to this when you go to the toolkit. And this is a great list. Knowing these 10 things will help bring out the good and minimize the not so good. The number one thing teachers need to know about students with Fragile X syndrome is that they are prone to hyperarousal and anxiety. And that's really important that they know that and they understand that up front. It is just how their nervous systems are wired. Most of the recommendations on the list are geared to maximizing focus and cooperation by minimizing hyperarousal and anxiety. So that link actually takes you so you can print off the top 10 list, which has information that as parents, a lot of this that we know it's great to have it handy in a way that you can give to new teachers or even teachers that you've had for a while. It's a great reminder for them and why you should do them. So each of the things on the top 10 list, like don't force eye contact. It doesn't just say don't force eye contact, but it also explains why. Eye contact will come naturally as the student becomes more comfortable with you. So these are really great top 10 things to know. It talks about redirecting, preparing for transitions, environmental triggers, and understanding the strengths of Fragile X. It's a wonderful resource for your teachers that you want to be sure that you're sending back to school with them.
So another good resource for you and for the teachers is the lesson planning guide. And again, the link is on, if you can download this link, it is on our website. But the guide was originally written for teachers who had little to no experience with Fragile X. But what's nice about it is that, like even the top 10 guide, it's a wonderful way for review for teachers when they each year when they start. Actually, the beginning of the guide has a great background on Fragile X syndrome and some of the learning styles of kids who have Fragile X. So, I mean, sometimes when people are looking for, just some general characteristics to give to their teachers, I tell them, look at the first 20 pages of this guide. Now, the guide is 100 pages long, and so what I recommend you do is you forward the link to your teacher and then go through the guide and print out the pages or page that would might give you some ideas. And while there may not be, there's actually lesson plans in the guide, and while there may not be one specifically what you're looking for, you can take the concept and apply it. So once you see some of the way that the lesson plans are set up, it gives you ideas on how to set up your own lesson plans. And one final thing, at the end of the guide is a wonderful list of resources for all the subject areas: reading, math, writing, and some developing social skills. So take a look at the resources in this guide. It's wonderful. So here's the next area that we want to that would be a great part of your toolkit would be the actual transition into school. Now I know many of you may have already started school, but some of these things you can still do, and some of these things would be keep in mind to do next year. And I think the main focus of this is just remembering that going from summertime and that your kind of lifestyle in summertime back to school is a big transition. And so it's just as big as the one going back, maybe the one you can remember most recently is the one going from school back, starting in going to the summertime. And so there's, on this link, there's ideas for, for all grades. There's general ideas that apply to every child in every grade. And then we also have specific ideas for if your child's going into elementary school or middle or high school, and then things you can also do at home. And just keeping in mind that, it's a big transition, and even with everything that you have perfect in place, the first couple of days might be a little different for your child because he's getting back into a new routine. And so just allowing the time to make that transition is very important. And so I think that, one thing that we have to remember is that, even we spend a lot of time and energy transitioning back into school, but the transition doesn't end the day school starts. It actually, the transitions continue. You've got your daily transitions that occur all day at school. I mean, actually, from the time you get up in the morning until you go to bed at night, your child's making transitions, and so you want to have those ideas at home and to get your child to school, and then you may want to give your teacher some ideas on, especially if your child has difficulty with transitions, making those transitions between the different classes, and so some of those ideas would be, of course you want to set up a routine for your child, and granted it does take a couple of days to get into the routine, but knowing that a routine is coming is comforting to them. And what helps facilitate that is some sort of visual schedule. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, about a school schedule. We'll give you some examples, but that's one important aspect of making a transition is having a schedule. And when you see on if you can, I don't know if you're been able to access our webpage on that, but we talk about giving prompts or warnings when transitions are going to occur, and bringing each activity to closure. That's huge for our children. You may want to use a transition object, and be sure to allow extra time if you can, but keep that in mind that your child might need some extra time. We'll talk a little bit more about including a sensory diet in your day and how that can facilitate transitions, and having plans for what's going to happen if the schedule changes. We suggest having a safe place for the child to go to if he or she gets overwhelmed. And then just think about the whole day, your child's entire day, and what needs to happen, and the best way to help your child make all those transitions. So I'll start here, and Holly's going to jump in because she's got a great, she's going to show you Parker's schedule. But, I mentioned about the actual having a visual schedule. So we talk about how it helps the child with his day and being able to transition throughout the day and give him a sense of control that I know I know what I'm doing now, and I know what's coming next. And the schedules can take a variety of forms. When Ian was in school, he preferred to have a schedule that had words on it. And sometimes he had his own schedule. Depending on what class he was in, he would have a schedule with his own schedule with words on it. But at the beginning of every school day, the teacher would put the schedule on the board too. And so these visual schedules not only help our children, but they help other children in the class too.
Parker was one that, and one of the things that I've heard a lot, and I'm sure Jayne hears a lot too, is my child doesn't want a picture schedule or a schedule that they can work with. And Parker was one of those. Parker absolutely did not want a schedule in his hand. He liked the schedule. His teachers also wrote it out on the board, and he liked that. but he needed a little bit more. And we went through probably every option possible with how to make a visual schedule that Parker would keep with him. We did them on the keychain. We did them just printing them out. We laminated them. The whole first year we tried this, Parker destroyed them every single day. For an entire school year, he destroyed them every single day. No matter what we did, there was no way he was going to keep the schedule. Going into the next year that we did it then, I honestly thought that the school was a little bit crazy that they wanted to keep trying this because he really didn't like it. But what we began to see that next school year was he needed it, and he started to have his para carry it with her. And even now, Parker's a freshman this year, this was the schedule that his teacher mailed to us the week before school started. We've since adapted it a little bit because we didn't know at this time because he hadn't started school yet, so we didn't know exactly when his breaks would be and when his snacks would be. Parker does a lot of eating Twizzlers or Goldfish or things for sensory snacks throughout the day, and until they got there and really spent some time working, we weren't really sure where those would be put in. So those are a little bit smaller now, but on his schedule that he uses each day now, it's actually bigger. So this is actually something really important to Parker, and what is probably most important to him is this is laminated, and he has a dry erase marker, and so every day he checks off. When he's done with English, he checks it off. When he's done with math, he gets to check it off. And then at the end of the day, he wipes it down, and it's fresh and ready for the next day. When Parker first decided he was going to maybe try using this, and we had the laminated one, he would start his day by going through and crossing off everything he didn't want to do. So if it was Tuesday's schedule and we had speech, or it was Thursday's schedule and we had OT, he would cross off speech and OT because he didn't want to do those. He would circle PE because that was his favorite. And it took us, a whole year of them completely failing, and then the next year of really us getting control back over that schedule. And now it's really a key thing to him. He's a lot more verbal now, and he could read a written schedule, but he needs those pictures, and that he needs to be able to check them off, and this is really the best thing for him. So if you have a child who doesn't like their visual schedule, I would just say don't give up on it real easily and stick to it, because we had a lot of success, like I said, the following school year when we tried it again. And so some things take a little bit more time to build up and get going. So the next thing in the toolkit, and this is one of the very important things, because you hear about it quite a bit, is the sensory diets and sensory diet activities. This section of the toolkit is actually taken from Tracy and Mouse, and who do a lot on sensory diets. And basically a sensory diet is an occupational therapy intervention strategy that's devised to attain and maintain appropriate arousal states throughout the day. So really you're looking at keeping them, at that even keel level throughout the day. And it really helps them function throughout the day so they can make it start to finish. Parker has several sensory breaks, and it could be, depending on your child, that they're going to need a sensory break every 15 minutes, and some children don't need it quite as often. And it's something that you'll really want to be working with your team with to be sure that they're doing something that's most appropriate for your child. This part of the toolkit with sensory diets also includes a sensory diet template, which is very handy. That was designed by Tracy and Mouse, and also a sensory diet activity list. So you have a couple of really great tools there that you can take to the school. If you have a staff that maybe isn't real familiar with sensory diets, these are two that I would really recommend printing off, the sensory diet template and the activity list. And these are both put together by Tracy and Mouse, and gives examples of different activities they can use, the providing deep pressure, the heavy work, working the hands, the oral motor, breathing, movement, vibration, rhythm, quiet time, and community-based activities all have, several options around them for different activities you can do in each of those areas. And then they also provide a template, which has an example of a sensory diet. And that's one of those things that I think a lot of people really stress. It is very important that you have that sensory diet worked into the school day. so the child can be more productive. So the next thing, and this is kind of my baby, is talking to students about Fragile X. I'm a firm believer in going into the schools and helping the children understand Fragile X. The link that this will take you to is actually, we'll link up to a podcast and PowerPoint that I did a few years ago on sort of how I do my presentation when I go into the schools. I think it's really important. It helps your child's classmates understand Fragile X in both a factual way and in a personal way. It's great to give a lot of examples. I started doing this when Parker was in second grade, and I have done it every year since. I've helped many parents throughout the country put together a PowerPoint or a presentation to go in from kindergarten all the way through middle school and high school. And so I think it's important. Every year we build on it. I think it's great because it helps foster those friendships and those relationships. The biggest thing to me is the understanding. To watch the kids the very first year that I went in, and we talked about all the ways they were the same, and all the great things Parker likes to do and all the great things they like to do. And then I said, you know, is there anything different about Parker? Is there anything that Parker does that's maybe a little bit different or unique? And they kind of looked at each other, but nobody wanted to raise their hand. And I was like, really? Because I noticed these things, you know, like he hides under his desk or he snores when you talk to him and things like that. So once I started talking and I let them know that it's okay, it's absolutely okay to notice differences, the big key is helping them understand. And so we talked about the differences and we talked about why he does those things. And once that power shifts so that you kind of give them the understanding and the control, I've seen really amazing relationships come from that, really great friendships that have lasted years. And every year, you know, you can build on it a little bit more, make it a little bit more technical, depending on the age group that you're working with. One of my favorite things is when one of Parker's peers that's in the regular ed classrooms will come to me and say, I need your help, I'm writing a paper, or they'll come to me after the fact and say, I wrote this paper, I wanted you to have a copy of it. And so to see that they're really absorbing that knowledge and they're learning, in addition to understanding Parker, it also helps Parker then through transition. So when he's in the hallway and it's too loud and he's got his hands over his ears or he's trying to get out of a situation, his peers can help him through it way better than the teachers can. And they can because they have that understanding now. So that's something I really believe in. And I think if you have that opportunity, you should do it. I know a lot of, especially the moms, worry about crying. I cried every year up until Parker was probably in 8th grade. I didn't cry as much, but I would just instantly start crying every time we start talking. It's really personal, and it's okay though. You're there to be your child's parent, and you can put together a really great presentation to help set them up for some great successes. So I would greatly encourage that. The other thing is talking to faculty. This is something that I really like because back when my children were diagnosed 10 years ago and I was starting to learn more and get more involved with Fragile X, I didn't really see a lot of opportunity to talk to the faculty. I was happy when I was able to talk to the students, but there wasn't a lot of opportunity to talk to the faculty outside of our team. And so I did a lot of focus on just talking to our team, and from that we were able to build. And whenever we would host an educational seminar, the school would actually help cover the cost so we could do an in-service just for the faculty. It's pretty simple, especially if you work with Jayne or I. Jayne has a really great PowerPoint about talking to faculty about Fragile X. And a lot of times if you ask, would you like to do this during an in-service day or something, a lot of times they would really appreciate that knowledge. So the really important thing to remember when you're doing this is that you are going in as a parent, and to be sure that you have your facts. You can reference back to the National Fragile X Foundation's webpage where they can go for more information. But you really want to be sure that you're keeping it personal. Talk about your own experiences and how Fragile X affects your child and has impacted your life. And this can be a really great thing, like I said, not just for your team, but for an entire faculty. So it's really great over the past definitely 3 years, maybe 4, where I've seen a lot more families have this opportunity to talk to the entire faculty, and I think that's a great trend that we have going on.
The next area that we'd like to talk about that we consider an important part of your toolkit is planning for emergencies. And when we talk about emergencies, we talk about fire evacuations, tornadoes, earthquakes, or even lockdowns. And so I think that one of the things that we really want to stress is that you have a discussion with your school, with your team, with your child's team, about how these things happen at your school and how you want your child to be involved with them. Some schools, by law, and actually Holly just told me this today, I didn't know that they're not supposed to let you know when a drill is going to occur. And so that means the teachers don't know. And so what I would encourage you to do is to sit down with your team and talk about, is this going to work for your child? In my son's case, when we sat down with the team, we talked about that we had seen Ian had some bad experiences when drills occurred without his knowledge prior to that, and so we decided to let him know about the drills ahead of time. We still had a visual schedule. We practiced the schedule, but when a drill was going to occur, we would let him know. They would go through the drill and be outside before the alarm sounded. I really wanted him to learn how to handle a true fire drill, but he tended to react in a negative way, and we thought, so rather than put him through that on a monthly basis, we actually ended up coming up with a plan on, well, what would we do if a fire really does occur? I mean, he went through the practices. He just didn't, it was the sounds that bothered him. And the whole emotional aspect of a fire drill, talking about a fire drill. But so you want to look at what's best for your child, look at what your states require, and then come up with a plan. And if so if you think your child, I understand wanting your child to be able to handle a fire drill, but if you think it's going to be too hard for your child, or if you want to come up with a plan that over time he will get used to a real fire drill, then you may need to work with you may need to ask your doctor to submit submit information about why or why not your child, why your child needs to have some particular action taken. And you want to think about the different types that could occur at your school, from the fire drills to an actual fire. What could be what could be different about, you're practicing something, you've got a practice in place. Could there be anything different? Think about what could be different if an actual fire took place, from like where your child is in the school to who he or she's with. But to a lockdown at your school, again, practicing a lockdown. And so, part of the reason that we came up and we decided to put this in the toolkit is that I talked with a family whose child went into a lockdown situation unexpectedly. The teacher didn't know it, and they ended up in a small, dark room, and the child had a very difficult time with that. And so I just want you to think about all the different scenarios that could happen and what would be best for your child, and we just suggest that you get a plan in writing. Sit down and have that conversation. Actually maybe you and your spouse or your significant other, and then have it with the school so that it's a positive experience and that your child learns from it. So Holly, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
For the lockdowns, we have rooms in our schools that are inside rooms, so they don't have windows to them, and they can get very dark. And I think one of the neatest things I've seen, we've got some really phenomenal teachers. One of the neatest things I've seen is we have one teacher who has packages of glow sticks for her students. So whether we've thankfully only had just drills, But when they do a drill, because it gets so dark in their room, they have a kit back there, and they can each pull out a glow stick, so they have their glow stick. It adds just a little bit level of comfort to them. So there's things you might want to think about. A lot of our teachers have, in the area that they go to, they have their own little kit that, maybe has a flashlight, or we have one teacher that keeps Twizzlers, because a lot of the children were like Parker, where they had that oral sensory where they needed something to chew on. So her kids would get Twizzlers when they did these. The first time Parker did one of these, it didn't go so well with the lockdown drills. It's hard for Parker to understand why he needs to stay quiet. So his teacher made it a game. They were seeing who can be the quietest doesn't really work with my children, because as soon as you're quiet for a second, then they're going to pop up and be like, you're going to talk again. So she made it a game with him, though. They were just whispering quietly, and I don't even know what all different things she did, but she made it a game with him. So it was fun, and he knew he had to stay quiet, and he got to be in control of telling the other kids to be quiet, that he couldn't tell them by talking. He could only shh them real quietly. And so for some of our children who, like Parker, really enjoys kind of being that leader, and so that was his job. He also has a schedule. And in Illinois, they don't get to tell the teachers when you're going to have a fire drill, because of the very reason that if you know, then everything's kind of routine, and you're just kind of going with it, and you're not all that concerned because it's a drill. But if you don't know, you go through the actions as if it were something real, because you're not sure if it's that day that you're having a drill or not. And we don't do them every month either. So Parker actually has a schedule, like his school schedule, his daily schedule, one for fires, one for tornadoes, one for lockdowns. And his para keeps them on her clipboard. And so it's something they go through once a month or twice a month, just to remind him, if it's a fire, his para always has his headphones with, and he doesn't usually need his headphones throughout the day. But in a case of a fire alarm, it does get really loud. So, the first thing on the list is put your headphones on. And then it just goes through the list of what they need to do. For the lockdown one, there's like 3 or 4 times in a row, just reminding him that, we do need to be quiet. So again, for Parker, that visual schedule is really helpful, and it's really handy, and it's made a big difference for us. And then when they do actually have the drills, he's been very successful with them. So there's that.
The final thing we'd like to talk about in the toolkit is about restraint and seclusion. And so we actually have a link that we suggest that you go to, and it's a link, and it talks about the laws in each of the states, and each state has its own laws with regards to restraint and seclusion. And so if you think that's going to be an issue for your child, or you're concerned about that, again, have a conversation with your team. Look up to see what are the rules in your state. Some states are way ahead of the game. Other states, they don't have to notify the parents for up to 48 hours after a restraint occurs, and they don't have to notify you right away. So another thing to have a conversation about with the team is, how do you handle this? Who would be involved? When would I be notified? Not only in not only a phone call, but maybe what sort of written report will you get, and how soon will you get it? And so think about what is going to what could happen, and again, get it in writing. I mean, no matter what the requirements for your state, you can sit and talk about what's best for your child, and get it written as part of his or her IEP. It's a very emotional and difficult time, and so I just think it's fair it's only fair that you get as much information as quickly as you can about what's going on, what happened, and to get to the bottom of of what happened. So
I think this is one of those things that's extremely important to be proactive on, whereas I never thought or knew anything about restraint and seclusion until I got my first notification that Parker had been restrained. I think it's a great thing to be proactive on, to look into it, find out the information, and hopefully, it's something that's not ever going to apply. For us, to this day, we still have a plan in place. Parker's a really big kid, and when he melts down, it does take more than just talking to him or isolating him to protect himself and to protect the other students. So it's really important that you're sure that everybody is trained and that going into it exactly like Jayne said, when the notifications come, who will be doing it in our schools. You have to be trained in order to provide restraint, and when those do happen, I think it's important to go back and look at that daily schedule and be sure that as much information as you can get that led up to it, that they're allowed, that they can give you, that they can remember, to get that included, so you can try to see maybe what was off or maybe what the antecedent was there. But I really think this is an important thing to be proactive on, and look up what your state's guidelines are.
yeah, call a meeting. Talk about it. Get it out there now. That in the what's going to happen in emergencies. Sit and talk about it before it happens, so you're doing what you think is best for your child.
And I think that's, although not related, I think that's a really important thing to remember is you can always call a meeting anytime. So, even if you just want to call a meeting to go over things in the toolkit, you can call meetings. And so you don't have to wait until things escalate. You can call a meeting at any time and bring your team together to get everybody on the same page. So while it's not our toolkit, I do think it's an important thing to remember. I believe David shared the link with you already, but just a reminder, if you haven't went online yet, if you go to toolkits, fragilelex.org, and follow that link, you can find everything that we talked about today, and most importantly, you can find all the links to everything that we talked about, so you can download everything and put it together and personalize it for your team. And of course, if you need any help with anything, Jayne and I are more than happy to assist you in any way that we can. Jayne,
I was going to say, feel free to forward any and all this information to your teachers. It's we don't have to keep it right here, but any of the ideas or any of the information, just forward it to them in an email. It's a good idea.
And I think it's important to remember, I talk a lot about Parker because Parker is a lot more affected than his sister. I do all of this for Allison too. She's very mildly affected. She's very verbal. She's very bright. She does extremely well, but she has a lot of sensory issues and a lot of anxiety. And so I put all of this together for her as well, so that her team has this going in and we have everything in place. And so I would say, no matter where your child is falling out on the spectrum, this is really helpful for sending them back to school and to refer back to all year long.
And actually, if I could add to that, it helped my daughter too. I mean, I did a lot of things I remember doing all these things when Ian transitioned into kindergarten, and I did the same thing for my daughter, and she's, a typical kid. And I think what happened, what I found is that it helped me too. It helped me, when I would go to the school ahead of time and I would take pictures, I would go, oh, okay, so this is what Ian's going to see all day long. This is who he's going to be talking to, and this is kind of the layout of the building. And so because some of our kids have limited language, you can ask the questions too, like, oh, where the cafeteria is or the library. So if you knew they went to the library that day, you could talk about the library because you had a picture of it in your head. I think it's good for it's good for everyone. I mean, like I think I mentioned when the visual schedule. I mean, I remember Ian had one in kindergarten, and all the children looked at it. I took photographs of all the different rooms they were going to, all their different classes throughout the day, and every child in the class looked at it at one time or another throughout the day. So,
I want to thank everybody for participating in today's Let's Talk webinar, and we have Holly and Jayne's email here if you have any other questions about anything that was presented. And Holly and Jayne just like to talk to people anyway, so if you just want to drop them a line, you can send them an email right there. We'd also like to thank Warren Global Conferencing for hosting tonight's webinar. Part of the proceed goes to the National Fragile X Foundation, so it's very special to us for them to provide us this space. And I just want to let everybody know that we're going to be sending these same slides as well as a link to a toolkit to everyone who registered. And you can just visit the toolkit's web address that we put up earlier. So thank you, everybody, and have a good night.
good night.
Thank you.